Have you ever fixed one Azure AD setting only to watch three other things break? The hidden interconnections between B2B Direct Connect, Teams Federation, and Conditional Access might be working against you right now. Stick around as we reveal how a single overlooked policy can unravel your cross-tenant workflows and how to spot the domino effect before it hits your users. The domino effect, when one setting topples collaboration. In theory, flipping the switch on B2B Direct Connect feels like progress. You enable it for a new partner tenant, maybe someone from a major vendor you're supposed to work with all quarter. You picture users jumping straight into Teams, sharing files, trading chat messages, maybe even starting a meeting on the fly. The reality kicks in fast. The first day, no one notices much. Day 2, you get a Teams message from a user in finance. I can't see the present status for our partner. Are they offline? Later, someone can open a shared file that arrived in chat. By the end of the week, the service desk is logging tickets about failed guest invites and quirky sign-in screens. It always starts with these little ripples. Nobody expects the entire collaboration to stall over what looks like an advanced but isolated setting. A lot of admins get caught off guard because the B2B Direct Connect toggle in Azure gets top billing. On the surface, that one step should give you cross-tenant chat and meetings with a friendly done message. But what's hiding behind the scenes is a web of policies and dependencies that touch everything from compliance to authentication. Direct Connect is really just an invitation. The real control sits with settings you probably aren't looking at. Conditional access, identity provider, trust, and those scattered Teams external settings all work in the background, sometimes out of sync, but always connected. It means that when you enable Direct Connect, you might be laying a foundation directly on top of several unmarked landmines. Let's talk about what happens when conditional access goes rogue. Everyone's had a partner announce, we're tightening up MFA, and it sounds reasonable. Who wouldn't want more secure sign-ins? But say tenant B enforces a new multi-factor authentication policy for all inbound connections. It sounds straightforward, but your users in tenant A suddenly hit a wall at sign-in. There's no warning, no friendly error message, just a vague something went wrong at login or a Teams window that never opens fully. Your users aren't even told it's the other tenant's settings impacting them. To most of them, it just looks like your IT is dropping the ball. It only gets trickier when you layer in Teams itself. You think you've set up everything in Azure, but buried in the Teams admin portal are external access toggles, many with names that sound close but behave very differently. Sometimes one unchecked option can silently block chat with all external users, and there's next to nothing in the default user experience to tell you why. It's not just Teams. Change a setting in Microsoft 365's sharing policies, and suddenly a document won't open from a chat, even when the file permissions look fine in SharePoint. When the symptoms show up, they don't point to your root problem. Users complain about missing messages or broken links, but the true cause almost never shows its face in a pop-up or error code. One global software firm rolled out Direct Connect for a new supply chain partner. Users expected to hop between calendars, book meetings, and share sensitive design files with a click. What happened was far messier. The partner tenant, running a strict conditional access rule for compliance, silently blocked file sharing because one required claim wasn't being passed. To users, it just looked like intermittent syncing issues. To IT, it sparked a 2-week email chain filled with screenshots and logs. Azure's audit logs gave no clear trace. The only clue was a subtle policy evaluation happening deep in the background of tenant B. The quick win turned into a detective hunt and collaboration ground to a halt. What this all boils down to is that external collaboration is never as isolated as it first appears. Flipping on B2B Direct Connect does not stand on its own. Every conditional access policy, every identity provider handshake, every Teams admin checkbox is woven together. When something shifts, a change to multi-factor rules in one tenant, a new Teams policy in another, you don't get a handy heads up. The effects ripple through your entire setup. Presence information might go missing, external meetings can break, document sharing might be blocked, or guest invites could fail outright. Each policy can unwittingly undo what the others are meant to enable. The classic admin mistake is treating these settings as one-offs. You fix a complaint about Teams external chat, so you adjust that. Someone else can't access a file, so you look at SharePoint permissions next. But you miss how everything is cross-referenced in the backend. That's how you end up with a setup that looks perfect from each admin portal but feels broken to end users. So even the most experienced IT teams find themselves battling invisible roadblocks if they ignore these hidden dependencies. Every policy or trust connection is a thread holding the system together. Ignore the web, and sooner or later, a single tweak yanks something important loose. Which brings us to the sharp divide that trips up admins again and again, knowing how Teams' external access and guest access actually work, because their differences are usually where the next federation problem sneaks in. Guest versus external, the overlooked difference that breaks federation. It's easy to see why most admins get tripped up by guest versus external access. At first, it's just a naming thing, two kinds of cross-tenant collaboration that sound interchangeable, and in the flow of an urgent deployment, they all blur together. But underneath, this small distinction drives more confusion than almost anything else in Teams Federation. Nearly every support ticket about can't join meeting or why is chat grayed out seems to trace back to this one fork in the road. Let's walk through what usually happens in the real world. Someone on your team gets a request. We need to add a partner from another company to our team's project. An admin hops into Azure, adds the partner as a guest, and calls it a day. It shows up in Azure AD, the name lands in the team's directory, and from the admin portal, it all looks set. The guest account exists, it's got permissions, and the partner even appears in the member list for the right team. But fast forward to the kickoff meeting, users get locked in those annoying loops of signing in, switching accounts, or staring at an error about not being authorized. Even with the right license and all the obvious checkboxes ticked, the guest can't see files, and external chat doesn't work at all. Guest access is about letting an external user become part of your tenant. They're invited in, provisioned as a guest, and then they exist in your Azure AD, subject to whatever group memberships or policies you assign. This works well if you need a partner to work within your tenant, share files, post in channels, co-author a document. In practice, most cross-company projects start with this model because it's familiar and feels secure. But if you want real-time chat, presence, calling, or collaboration that doesn't require the person to keep switching tenants every 10 minutes, you need external access as well. That's the overlooked piece. Teams' external access lives in its own world. It's a set of policies managed separately in the Teams admin center that governs who your users can talk to outside your tenant. You can allow all domains or just a pick list of partners or block everything but internal chats. Here's where things get messy. External access is not linked to Azure AD guest access. You could have a perfectly valid guest account for a partner company, but if Teams external access is restricted either on your end or theirs, chats and calls won't work. The guest will try to message someone and nothing happens, or worse, they're routed to their own home tenant and don't even realize it. Now, here's the tripwire almost nobody expects. Inside Teams admin, there's a checkbox, usually deep in the settings panel, that blocks external communication. It's easy to miss, especially if you're focusing on conditional access or Azure AD permissions. If this single option is left unchecked, it will silently block all chats with users from federated tenants. No error, no alert, just silence. The rest of your setup could be flawless, and you're left puzzling over why nothing works, clicking through audit logs that offer zero hints. There's no flashing light or warning sign in the admin portal, just a broken user experience. It's not just about toggles, though. Teams lets each tenant control their own inbound and outbound federation settings, sometimes at multiple levels. In some cases, your partner's Teams admin has restricted communications to only allow certain domains, or they've blocked all but their internal staff. You, meanwhile, have done everything by the book on your side, set up direct connect, and confirmed guest invites are working. But your outbound chat request hits a wall thanks to a rule living outside your controls. Suddenly, Teams Federation enabled doesn't mean what you think it does. Imagine you're working with a legal firm. You add a handful of their lawyers as guests so they can collaborate on shared files and join Teams channels. Later, one of your executives wants to chat with them directly from Outlook or Teams. They try to send a message but get nothing in return. No response, no presence info, not even a notification that the chat bounced. You double-check the B2B Direct Connect status and it shows as active. But a quick look in the Teams admin panel of the partner tenant would reveal a global policy locking down all external chats, including yours. None of this is obvious from your own tenant's perspective. This is why the difference between guest and external access is so much more than naming. It's a technical wall. Guest access gives someone a key to your tenant, but external access determines which doors actually open and which features light up for both sides. Missing this means you can spend hours troubleshooting broken federation only to realize you're dealing with two completely separate control systems. What it all boils down to is this. If you want to stay clear of silent roadblocks and endless user complaints, you have to know which setting drives which collaboration experience. Guest access is not a replacement for external access, and managing one does nothing for the other when it comes to Teams federation. Every cross-tenant connection relies on these fine-grained policies on both sides of the fence. The real challenge comes when everything in Azure and Teams looks green, but your users still hit invisible barriers. Sometimes those barriers aren't even under your control. That's where identity provider settings and Azure AD directory sync can throw another wrench in the works, even when every policy seems perfect from the surface. Identity providers and sync, the silent federation killers. If you've ever spent an afternoon triple-checking Teams admin, conditional access, and guest permissions, but users are still locked out or showing up as unknown in chats, you've brushed up against the invisible layer that trips up even seasoned admins, identity provider configuration and directory sync. Right when you think you've accounted for every Teams policy and security group, the real culprit is often sitting quietly in the background, untouched until it brings the entire cross-tenant setup to a standstill. The less obvious problem is that identity in Microsoft 365 is never just one knob. Managing guest access or external chat doesn't matter if your authentication pathways are tangled or if your user data syncs are out of date. While Teams and Azure AD offer dashboards that seem to surface the big issues up front, they don't call out the silent failures winding their way through your Federation Trust identity provider settings or Azure AD Connect sync cycles. It's not flashy, but it's where the stubborn problems almost always live. Let's say you finished the basics. Teams external access policies reviewed and right. Conditional access, double-checked and confirmed. Guest permissions are in shape and users have been added as guests. Yet, the next morning, a sales manager can't join a partner's meeting, calendar invites aren't making it through, and a couple of users have duplicate contacts that seem to shadow their accounts. These issues show up in weird ways. Instead of the obvious access denied, you might see a Teams user appearing twice in search or users not showing up in contact lists at all. The deeper problem is sitting between how the tenants trust each other and how identities flow back and forth. Here's the overlooked part. Identity provider configuration dictates how users authenticate, not just within your own tenant, but across any established federation. If you partner with an organization that's running ADFS and everything works fine, all it takes is a shift. Say they flip to cloud authentication with password hash sync instead of federated ADFS. That one change, even if it looks like an infrastructure upgrade on their side, can snap your users' access without warning. Suddenly, external users can't sign in at all or get endless prompts for credentials. Even more confusing, this isn't always timed to a planned rollout or flagged in the service health feed. The identity trust is broken, but there's no big red flag in the portal. What's even trickier is that the other tenant's configuration impacts you, but you don't get a say in it. If they miss a step updating their federation trust, say their metadata isn't published or claims rules are misconfigured, your users see authentication failures that appear to come from nowhere. There's no central log showing that a partner's identity change broke things. Your side just gets locked out. Azure AD Connect brings its own flavor of drama. Most admins are familiar with running regular syncs, but what's less obvious is the impact of missing or mismatched attributes. If a sync schedule gets delayed or interrupted, users might not make it into Azure AD at all. Or worse, they show up as shadow accounts. These duplicates can confuse calendar sharing, cause contacts to vanish, or leave mailboxes in a limbo state, half in, half out of the system. A painful real-world example, an executive assistant needed to see the calendar for a partner executive, both sides freshly set up with B2B Direct Connect. For weeks, the assistant saw nothing but a string of cryptic errors. Turns out Azure AD Connect on the partner side failed to push the correct UPN, user principal name attribute. The result, Azure AD created two records for the partner executive, a real account and a ghost. This shadow account broke free, busy lookups, so the calendar integration failed silently. The logs in Teams and Azure offered nothing but vague user not found errors. Only when the directory sync got fixed and duplicate accounts cleaned up did calendar sharing actually start working. The real point here, the majority of cross-tenant failures, especially those that pop up weeks after a rollout, aren't caused by end-user error or a missed policy in Teams. They crop up because the underlying identity fabric, the federation trust, the authentication pathways, and the directory sync break without notice. These aren't visible in the Teams admin UI, and the only hint you might get is a cryptic error code buried deep in Azure logs, if anything shows at all. What actually works is running a thorough audit whenever new cross-tenant connections go live or whenever your partners announce changes to identity providers or sync routines. That means checking federation trust settings, validating that directory syncs are running and attributes map correctly, and confirming nobody has changed the authentication method behind the scenes. All of this raises an uncomfortable question. If every layer can introduce silent failures, how do you roll out changes or enable new features without breaking the parts of your setup that people already depend on? There's a method to doing this right, a way to sequence changes and map dependencies so you don't have to play catch up after the fact. Avoiding the trap, a systems approach to resilient collaboration. If you've been in the admin seat for any amount of time, you know the urge to make things work fast can sneak up and bite you later. Fixing one complaint about Teams chat or flipping a new requirement for MFA doesn't always just close a ticket. Some days, that single fix is what knocks out calendar sharing, orphaned contacts, or even brings existing partnerships to a crawl. There's a rhythm to chasing down these problems, but it's easy to forget just how interconnected these systems are until everything feels off. The reality is plenty of admins are still treating B2B Direct Connect as something you just turn on when it's time to work with a new supplier or client. Maybe leadership wants an open door collaboration policy to speed up a merger, or HR needs smoother onboarding of contractors. The temptation is to roll out these features in isolation. Check the boxes in Azure AD, glance over team settings, call it a win, and move on. But these parts have hidden connections that only show up when users report trouble after the fact. If you haven't mapped out what actually ties these systems together, it's almost guaranteed something will break where you least expect it. That's how you end up with the classic chain reaction. Enable direct connect, watch a new conditional access rule block authentication for half the company, adjust a team's external access toggle, and suddenly file sharing falls apart in SharePoint. And the kicker, the admin portal screens rarely spell it out. You see success check marks in one place, but nobody mentions that a newer MFA policy on the partner tenant will push users into endless loops, or that calendar invites silently bounce because of a mismatch in sync attributes. A better way to approach this is to see your IT environment like an ecosystem, where even small configuration changes have ripple effects. Start with a whiteboard or even the Teams wiki. List everything that could touch collaboration. You've got conditional access, blocking or permitting inbound and outbound traffic. Teams admin settings, which have their own set of boundaries for federation and guest user permissions. Identity providers and how authentication is actually being handed off. Then throw in Azure AD Connect Sync, which pushes updates behind the scenes and can create headaches with duplicate or stale accounts. If you draw these out with lines between them, what you get is a messy web. And that messiness isn't just annoying, it's exactly where the silent failures hide. Just to make it real, let's sketch out a scenario. Imagine updating a conditional access policy to enforce MFA for all external users. The intention is good, tighten security, reduce risk. But that same policy change might also block service accounts from accessing Teams resources, strand external guests who authenticate a different way, trip up legacy calendar connections to Outlook, or cause files shared in Teams chats to stop opening for certain domains. None of these symptoms hit at once, and users don't always draw the connection. They blame bad Wi-Fi, a quirk in their browser, or just general Microsoft weirdness. Only later, piecing together tickets, do you find that the common factor was a policy change that wasn't flagged in anyone's collaboration checklist. That's why building a dependency map before you roll out B2B Direct Connect is more practical than it sounds. For each cross-tenant project, whether it's a one-time event with a supplier or a permanent link for collaboration, write down every service involved. Is Teams external access open for the specific domain? Does conditional access allow federated login, or will it prompt external users for MFA in a way their tenant can't support? Are UPNs synced cleanly? And is directory sync healthy with no objects stuck in sync errors? Has the partner updated their identity provider, switched off federation, or paused sync without notifying anyone? Tracking these answers is not overkill. It's what keeps the lights on after launch. Sequence is just as important as coverage. If you rush to enable Direct Connect, but haven't aligned your teams and conditional access settings to match the partner's environment, you will get broken presence data or missing calendar sharing. Some admins have learned the hard way. Reconfiguring identity providers after federation is up can destroy hard-won external chat connections, turning a healthy collaboration into a ghost town overnight. Others leave guest restrictions open until the last minute, exposing sensitive data that's hard to claw back after the fact. In the real world, there's no substitute for a checklist before you hit the big green button. Audit conditional access for both internal and partner users. Validate Teams federation for target domains on both ends. Confirm guest policies in Azure AD. Check group membership visibility settings, and critically inspect all identity provider trusts and sync cycles in Azure AD Connect. You can spot duplicates or missing users with a quick directory export and fix mismatched UPNs before users ever log a ticket. The only real way out of the B2B direct connect trap is a systems mindset. These platforms aren't just modules, they're a living, shifting environment. Approaching changes in sequence and tracking your dependencies is what lets you catch that domino effect before it takes down your user experience. When you see it as a system, not a collection of switches, you give yourself the room to respond before users become your help desk's main event. Now, as dependencies multiply and even small tweaks can ripple out to dozens of workflows, the question is how to stay ahead, how to spot the next hidden dependency before it hits your users out of nowhere. Most admins know the feeling. You adjust one setting and wake up to a wave of new issues. The problem was never just that toggle. It's the silent web of dependencies tying together Azure AD, Teams, and everything in between. The real risk isn't making a change, it's missing how those changes ripple out. Before you hit save, ask what systems, users, and partners your changes could impact. Map every dependency, test your plan, and talk with stakeholders before you go live. If you keep questioning those invisible links, you'll avoid those collaboration disruptions that always seem to come out of nowhere.